I truly believe we're all more capable than we know.
This is A New Angle, and I'm your host, Justin Angle, marketing professor at the University of Montana College of Business. This podcast is my chance to speak with cool people doing awesome things in and around the great state of Montana. We are proudly underwritten by First Security Bank and Blackfoot. Hey folks, welcome back, and thanks for tuning in. Today I speak with Meg Fisher. Meg is a doctor of physical therapy, athletic performance coach, and motivational speaker right here in Missoula, Montana. She's also a decorated athlete, having won gold, silver, and bronze medals in the 2016 and 2012 Paralympic Games. And Meg's also accumulated 10 world championship titles. At the age of 19, Meg was involved in a tragic car accident that nearly killed her and took the life of her best friend. She survived a coma and lost the lower portion of her left leg. In this conversation, we talk about those experiences and how they shaped Meg's approach to life, as well as her work helping others achieve their health, wellness, and performance goals. I'm excited for you to learn all about this amazing woman right now. Okay, so we're here today with Meg Fisher. Meg, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Oh, it's a privilege to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I am excited. We're finally getting this conversation done and finally meeting, although not in person, unfortunately. That'll come at some point. So tell us, how did a kid from Chicago find Missoula? How did Missoula end up on your radar screen?
Well, originally, I'm actually a Canadian. I'm from Alberta.
Okay.
So I went to high school in the Chicago area. And when it came time to look for a university, I had one of those big college encyclopedias. I suppose they're all online now. Maybe they don't sell those.
You're probably right. Those giant sort of, I don't know who it was, but like U.S. News and World Report's giant book.
Yeah. So I don't know if this will resonate with people, with all kids listening to this now, but colleges used to be listed in a book.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was a thick book, and it was quite easy to eliminate many schools because I was not interested in anything east of the Mississippi. I wanted to move west. I wanted to be near the country that really felt like home to me.
Sure.
And that'd be the Rocky Mountains. I used to live in a small town called Rocky Mountain House, Alberta. And while I didn't want to go to school in Alberta, I thought, okay, well, the closest I can get is Missoula. And I knew from that college book that the University of Montana had a lot of majors that I was interested in, because like many freshmen, I didn't know exactly what career path I wanted to follow.
Right, who does?
Right? I mean, how can you? And then additionally, I knew there was a tennis team here, a Division I tennis team. And I've been playing tennis since I was 3 years old. And I wanted to try to continue that tennis career as long as possible. The University of Montana allowed that opportunity. Mm-hmm. And in my younger years, I'd really admired Jane Goodall. Thought maybe veterinarian might be my path, or wildlife biology.
Interesting. So that athletic piece was deeply ingrained as part of your identity pretty early on.
Very much so.
Yeah.
I was a very shy kid, and I used sports as a way to make friends and to find a community, because I wasn't the kid that was the most talkative at the lunch table, or the most dynamic, or the class clown. I didn't have any of those accolades, but I was always coordinated. I was always fast, and I used those strengths to my advantage to build a community.
Sure. And then, we've heard this story, or many of our listeners have, about your tragic car accident and losing your best friend and a large part of your leg and your foot. At that moment and in that process, this identity that you're talking about had to have been just rocked to its core. Tell us a little bit about that sort of moment and how you chose to respond.
Yeah, there's the visible scars and the invisible scars that really all of us have. In that car accident, most visibly, I'd had my foot literally ripped from my body. And so that was, of course, easy to see. What most people don't know is that I was in a coma for a week. I had some brain surgery. My pupils were fixed and dilated, and I couldn't breathe on my own. Due to a lot of people's hard work, expertise, and skill, I survived. And I think the mental challenge was and continues to be something that I have to overcome, or an obstacle that's still present. Maybe the neatest thing is that I woke up gregarious. A frontal lobe injury is kind of your higher order processing and a bit of your personality. So I used to be really shy and would never have imagined I'd be on a podcast able to speak.
Wow.
Yeah, but I woke up with almost the inability to shut up.
Sure. Yeah.
And I didn't have a filter. I had to relearn that social filter of the things you say and you don't say, and when you say them and when you don't, or when you stare and when you don't. Speaking was actually hard for me. I still have a bit of a stutter, a little bit of word finding problems, which most people would say, yeah, that's normal. You sound normal. We all have troubles. I can tell you it didn't feel this way prior to my accident. Writing still tends to be a little harder, but I've been able to successfully graduate with an undergraduate degree. I've gone on to a graduate degree. So it's been overcomable, and just, I guess, yeah, part of my story. But more and more we're talking about head injuries. When I got hurt 19 years ago, it was 18 years ago. Nobody talked about head
Yeah,
injuries.
much less was understood, for
Oh
sure.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, the brain still is very much the outer space and we don't know very much, but nobody talked to me about what the problems I was having. All they did was they did a EKG of my brain, and made sure that I wasn't at a high risk for epilepsy or stroke. So
Sure. So
Yahtzee,
basic just stability
yeah,
stuff, but
right.
to think about, like, that's a ripple that I hadn't really considered in learning about your story, is that, you sort of wake up and you find yourself in a body with a different reality, but also, like, your brain's operating differently and you're finding yourself with different personality traits. And, like, talk about identity getting rocked. That must have been really weird and challenging to kind of work through all at once.
And when you're in it,
Yeah.
like all of us, we don't have the perspective to always put words to it.
Sure.
I didn't know what was going on. Every part of my body was black and blue or swollen or scraped or scuffed. I wasn't me. And when you wake up from a coma, it's not like in the movies. You don't wake up and the lights are on. I describe it very much like being in a really bad disco. The lights kind of flicker on and off, and at odd intervals. You don't know. You wake up, the lights turn on, your eyes open, and you get to look around your hospital room, and then the lights are off.
Yeah.
And so, and maybe there's some mercy in that, and that you're not faced with reality all at once. But I remember my eyes opening and looking down at myself in the sheets because I didn't know where I was, and you're trying to orient yourself and so forth. And I saw that I didn't have 2 foot bumps over my toes. If you look down in the sheets tonight, these are things we definitely take for granted. I'm sure no one else has thought of this, but our feet leave little lumps on the sheets. And so when I looked down, I had 1 lump, and I thought, oh no, this is bad. And I remember pretty early on thinking, like, this is going to be hard for my tennis career. Because that's again, that was my identity.
It's the first thing you go to. I get it.
Yeah. It might sound strange or shallow, but I remember thinking, like, oh no. But then the lights were out again. I was gone.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So, and people wake up differently. I guess at one point I woke up and I thought I was a baseball player for the Chicago Cubs. I'm a 5th generation Cubby. I'm a longtime Cubs fan.
Yeah.
And so I guess I thought I was a Cubs player, and I had slid into home base. And in doing so, I had injured my foot. And somehow this nurse, who I later learned his name is Pete. I had no idea. As far as I knew, I called him Sammy because I thought he was Sammy Sosa.
Okay.
So the story I told myself in the hospital very early on was that I was a Cubs player. I slid into home base. I got hurt, and this is why I don't have a left foot.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the kid down the way woke up and thought he was Timmy from South Park. And his parents didn't know he watched South Park. And anyway, I guess we all have
what
wake
a
up
wild
differently.
ride. And at some point, I mean, a lot of Missoulians have come to know, your sort of just incredible athletic success in triathlon and cycling. But at that time, you sort of figured out a way to get through that, get out of the hospital, learn to walk. A lot of people telling you like, hey, this is how it's going to be. You're not going to be able to do these things. And a lot of people saying probably some things to give you an expectation of your future, but certainly not the expectation that you had previously.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe talk about that. How did you kind of
Sure.
find direction and this notion that you're going to assert yourself and regain an athletic identity? If that was at all the right framing, I'm not sure.
Yeah, how do you find direction when you're rudderless? That's what we all face, whether that's today with the myriad of challenges we're facing, or job loss, or change in job situation, or family dynamics. Like when you don't have solid footing, how do you push off in any direction?
Yeah.
I think the people who were giving me advice at the time, and maybe inadvertently or intentionally trying to lower my expectations, did so out of care.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe any one of them really wanted to limit my horizons, other than to make sure that those horizons were attainable. That said, one of the characteristics I held on to was a sense of stubbornness. I think my mom or my dad will tell you from early on that I've been fiercely independent and stubborn, which I don't think is a bad thing. I think with any stubbornness, any stubborn trait, some people might want to call it grit. And maybe that's catchier nowadays, but it's also same. And it can take you far, and it can also get you in a lot of trouble. Right?
Sure. Yeah, it cuts both ways.
Yeah. And how I regained my identity, maybe because it's the only identity I knew. And I didn't, like a lot of people, I wouldn't say that I have high confidence in myself. Like I wouldn't consider myself as successful, or the only way I knew myself was shy and timid. And so being gregarious or outgoing was still a new trait. And all I knew was like, in order for me to regain a sense of community, this is what I needed to do.
Sure.
Additionally, like that's how everyone else knew me, right? Like just because I woke up different, looking different, and perhaps acting differently, people still knew me as the Meg, or as my family calls me, Megan. Like they still knew me as that. And so they allowed me to have opportunities that I seemingly like to do. Interestingly, so when I woke up and came back from the hospital a month later, so I got hurt at the end of June, so all of July and in early August is when I was life flighted back to my mom's house in Chicago. Basically, all my all my high school friends were going off to college.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a community in the Chicagoland area outside the tennis community. So as soon as I could, I was back on the tennis courts. This older woman who had retired, I'd played tennis with her and I'd known her for years. Her daughter was actually the college tennis coach of my partner who passed away.
Okay.
So it just tightens that circle a little tighter. Her name was Vicki Condon. Vicki passed away about 10 years ago from cancer. And just a quick side note, fuck cancer, right?
Yeah,
So
indeed.
She was retired, like I said, and had time on her hands. And she really took me under her wing and took an office chair from her own home office and a bucket of balls, took me out to the courts and said, by the time you're standing, you're going to have a perfect volley.
Here you
So
go.
she gave
Right.
me, so she really is like, okay, that's tennis was her language. Tennis was her passion. And she knew it was something that I continue to love. And she gave me that avenue. And I got a job back at the tennis courts that I I had worked at previously, and it kind of built from there. I was teaching kids from an office chair as soon as I could stand. I was teaching older kids and adults from standing next to a ball hopper. And then once I could be more dynamic, I was doing more things with tennis. Interestingly, 11 months after my first amputation, or since the first accident, I lost more of my leg. So I'm one of those rare people that got to lose their leg twice. But that was getting back to the tennis court always actually was my motivation. I wanted to move better. I wanted to not hurt. I wanted to be dynamic.
And was that the motivation to have that sort of more extensive amputation, was to have a more, athletically oriented prosthesis? Is that kind of where you were at?
Yeah, to some extent.
Yeah.
Initially, my initial injury was called a 4-foot avulsion fracture.
Okay.
For the geeky people out there, that means basically I snapped my foot in half in front of my heel bone. And so everything in front of my heel bone was gone, all the long bone or the irregular bones of the foot, as well as the long bones of the toes and my little toes.
Okay.
They'd taken half of my stomach muscles to cover that hole in skin from my thigh to also cover that muscle graft. So I only have half my tummy muscles too. So that's pretty a fun party joke. You have a scar as long as your arm, and my tummy caves in. So it's pretty funny. But so yeah, I'd had that prosthesis, which was very much like a ski boot. It was a clamshell, like those old ski boots that kind of Velcroed together or snapped together, but it had no ankle motion. It had a little bit of flex in the foot from a carbon plate, but the prosthesis wasn't dynamic, and I was also in quite a bit of pain due to injuries. I'd had to have other surgeries in my ankle, and bones were moving, and it just wasn't. I couldn't walk the length of a football field. Like I went to a football game, and somebody had to give me a piggyback ride back to my dorm because I couldn't walk back. So yes, it was to be more athletic, but it was also just to be pain-free. It was I didn't know what kind of athletic future I would have, but I just wanted more for myself.
Yeah, at that
I'll agree
point,
if you want, but yeah, I just didn't want to hurt.
And so at some point you found endurance sports in all of this.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So I did my first triathlon 11 months after my second amputation. My whole life I'd watched the Ironman on TV. I'd seen triathletes around Missoula and thought, wow, how can a body do 3 sports in one day? That's amazing.
And let's just signpost that for a moment. 11 months, essentially going from, you pretty much have to relearn to walk from scratch at that point, I would imagine, right?
Yes.
And so let's just let that sink in, to go from an amputation surgery where you come out of it having to relearn to walk to 11 months later, less than a year, doing and completing a triathlon. It's pretty remarkable. And that was only the beginning.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. But when you're living in it, you're just thinking each day comes, no matter how bad a day is or how good a day is, it always ends and a new one starts. So it's also always calming and reassuring, but sometimes also a bit frightening. But so I just knew that I always felt like Sarah was with me, my partner who passed away in the car accident. And I'm not here to make any spiritual comments other than I just always felt her with me, and I didn't want to let her down, and wanted to live my life in such a way that gave honor to her not being here, because that's just really the biggest loss in this whole accident. I'd lose my other foot. Like, I'd trade places with her in a heartbeat, but I'm here. So let's do the best while I can. And I guess that's been a motivation for many things, is I'm going to do the best I can. And seeing that triathlon, I for my whole life had never thought I could do a triathlon. Sure, I was fit. I was one of the faster kids on the tennis team. I was strong. I was coordinated, and all that got taken away to the point where people were having to feed me, and I couldn't do anything on my own. And then, 11 months later, from that second amputation, I was like, well, I'm going to do this triathlon and see if I can do it. My goal is to not be last. It's okay to be last. I mean, I've been last in several races, but
sure. But I understand having that goal. Yeah.
Yep. And I was 7th from last in the Grizzly Triathlon. I had never swam 1,000 yards in a row. In fact, when I swam, I would hit the lane line, because when you only have one flipper, you don't swim straight.
Yeah, I suppose you're right. Yeah.
And then I had to borrow somebody's bike, because I never biked 20K intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
And then since my accident, I hadn't run 5K. Like, I used to run because I enjoyed it, but I hadn't run like that in this new chapter. And as soon as I crossed that line, that cold spring day, I was a triathlete.
Yeah.
Like, that's people put so many barriers on their lives. I mean, as a tennis player, like, I like to play outside, maybe 70, 75 degrees, but not too hot, but please, definitely not too cold. It can't be too windy, because then that messes with where the ball goes. If it's too sunny, actually the sun gets in my eyes. Can we actually have partly cloudy and maybe actually a soft breeze, so like you don't get too hot just standing around.
Right.
Yeah, so like, it needs to be a flat court. It has to, whatever. Tennis players, we can tease each other, but when you're a triathlete, like, you're out in the elements. It doesn't matter if it's
describing tennis players as higher maintenance than triathletes is an interesting framing. A New Angle is brought to you by First Security Bank and Blackfoot, two cool companies doing awesome things all over Montana.
This is University of Montana President Seth Bodner, and you're listening to A New Angle.
But I understand completely what you're saying. And one thing you said in there that really stands out is, once you cross that line, you are a triathlete, like, back to identity. Like, you've got this, to use an inept metaphor here, but you've got feet on the ground, so to speak. Like, you've got your earth beneath you, I would imagine. Do you start to feel like yourself in some way again? Or are you feeling like somebody new entirely?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I've never thought of it that way, but I guess in truth, I think I felt like, wow, I've done this. And then, like, all of a sudden I would have this community of people, but like a lot of us, I think I always felt on the outside, whether I was or I wasn't. I think at that time in University of Montana Grizzly Triathlon history, there was some pretty exceptional athletes.
Absolutely. This was a hotbed for triathlon, for triathletes, for sure. Some of the best in the world.
I mean, people that continue to set records, Ben Hoffman, Lindsey Corbin, to name a few, but Adam Jensen, Matt Shryock. I mean, you could name drop as much as you wanted, but there were just, and there continue to be, great athletes in this town. And I tried to be as fast as them in triathlon. When you're down a flipper and when you're down a leg, like, you're just not going to be.
Sure.
I became a fast master swimmer. I was a fast cyclist, and I became actually pretty darn fast. And I was an okay runner. Like, let's just be honest. So I didn't necessarily feel like I'd made it. I didn't feel like I'd arrived.
Okay.
If that makes sense. Like, when I crossed that line, I felt like, okay, I'm on my way. Like, this is definitely a step in the right direction. This all felt good. This was a challenge that I could sink my teeth into.
Sure.
Like, I guess that's what I felt like. I felt like, okay, like, because when your medical chart says, like, amputation, or people assume that, like, they label me an amputee, and it's a label that actually I fight against, because I'm just me. Like, I don't like being called an amputee, truth be told. In many of the same ways that we don't call people by their impairments. Like, we don't tell somebody that, like, oh, you're a spinal cord injury. Oh, you're an alcoholic. Like, it's just, I find it unintentionally abrasive.
Yeah.
And so that's just my stance in it, because for me, I'm me. Like, I'm a para athlete, and I really hold on to that. And para is from the Greek prefix meaning alongside or beside. So I'm doing everything, quote unquote, you're doing, but I'm doing it we're both doing it to our highest level, but it's just alongside.
Sure. That makes total sense. And you've done that alongside at the highest level that it is done, winning gold medals, silver medals in the Paralympic Games, World Championships. I mean, your rise was meteoric and just incredible success. That story's been told in other venues, so I don't want to use a ton of our time together with that. But that chapter of your life has kind of, at least that level of competition has closed to some degree, and you've moved on to practicing as a doctor of physical therapy and a coach. And talk about that, because that's another big identity transition, right? To step away from that competitive lifestyle and just being in it all the time, training, to now maybe in a position where you're helping others do that.
Oh, yeah. I think stepping away from the national team, I think like anybody, where certainly fire is a big component, or wildland fire is a big component to people here in Montana or in the West Coast. And so like leaving a fire crew or leaving the national team, I think there's always, or gosh, if you're at the age of retirement, like, retiring from anything can be a bit jarring, because it's the merry-go-round that and those were a community of people that I was very close with. I loved the challenge of training, travel. It really suited me well, but it needed to stop, and it needed to change, and somebody else needed to take my shoes, and they've carried it on. And obviously the merry-go-round hasn't stopped, minus COVID.
Right. But, that's another story.
During the 2012 lead up to 2012 games, I actually got into a physical therapy program at the University of Washington in Seattle. And that was just an awesome opportunity. I think all athletes, to some degree, know that their clock is ticking, and at some point it's going to be different. So I had people in my life who were hugely supportive of my academic career, and that was great. And my national team was also as supportive as they could be. It was amazing. Like, I had clinical rotations, moved to Colorado Springs, and I had, a pause to go to the games and to come back from the games. Like, it was just, I was a very fortunate person to be able to have my cake and eat it too. So having a doctorate in physical therapy is awesome. One of the people who changed my life the most was my physical therapist. Opposed to many healthcare practitioners, like, you don't spend that much time with your surgeon. You don't spend that much time with your nursing staff, although even that's more than your surgeon or physicians, and so on and so forth. But with a physical therapist, I was in PT a lot, like 3 to 4 hours a week.
Huge.
And so with that person, she Tasha Mulligan, she was such a role model for me, and she helped me understand that even though my brain had gotten shaken and scrambled and jarred, that I had the capacity to learn again. And when I was a kid, I didn't think I was smart enough to be a physician or to be work in healthcare. That's kind of why I thought maybe animals might be better for me, because I didn't think I was smart enough to work with people. Though spending all those hours in the PT clinic, I was like, holy smokes, like, I'm interested in this. And by learning about that, I can help myself, but oh my gosh, I can help someone else. And that just kind of being able to pay it forward is just hugely satisfying. I can't believe it's a job. I'm just blown away. I feel so lucky. And it's more of a life's mission. So physical therapy, personal training, or coaching, they're largely intertwined, because it's just helping somebody do what they want to do without pain, hopefully faster. I'm also a certified athletic trainer, so I worked with college athletes for a while. I'm a cycling coach. Like, all of these initials after my name really just spell out that I love the human body and I want to help.
So let's maybe talk about your approach to that work. I'll sort of insert a little bit of a personal vignette. I as someone who's engaged in some of these same athletic pursuits, injuries are kind of a part of it. And I've seen a lot of physical therapists and had a lot of people as part of the team to help me running and riding. And there's a lot of time where you're told that something is wrong with you, right? Yeah. Like, you're weak in this muscle, or your foot is messed up, or this, that, and the other. And sort of think about it from a positive psychology standpoint, like that, like why not talk about what's right with you
Yeah.
and what you need to do to capitalize on those things that's right with you.
Oh yeah.
It just sounds like from your approach that might resonate with you and how you try to work with people to get to where they want to go.
Wow, you nailed it. Yeah, thanks very much. I truly believe we're all more capable than we know.
Right.
First of all, I think that often through these adversities, setbacks, whether it be plantar fasciitis, biceps tendonitis, any itis, or a new knee or anything, a new ACL, a lot of people think like, sort of like how you asked early on, like how did you overcome this? How did you find direction again? And I find great privilege in helping people identify what direction they want to go in or resume, and then get back to those things. And I think helping people believe in their own strength and capacity or resilience, I think that's my shtick. That's what I love.
And
That's
how do you do that? Like how do you are there levers you sort of figured out how to pull, or like what's your kind of approach? Is it totally based on the individual, or like how do you find a way into that?
Oh gosh, I'm not sure if it's quantifiable, but
Right.
I think perhaps there's a bit of my own energy that I put in there. Like I become so invested, respectfully invested, in someone else's success, and because their success is my success. Many years ago, when I started as an athletic trainer, like my athletic training degree or career as a student, I was on crutches for a year of that. And I think that was pretty crazy in that I'm working with Division I athletes, helping them run faster, and I can't even take a step.
Right.
And so I think fundamentally, like seeing somebody else's success is in some ways like not in some ways, in very many ways, is fulfilling to me. It's not my success, it's their success, but like that is what fuels me and what drives me to help somebody, is to see them succeed, and eventually to succeed without my help, and hopefully down the road somewhere our paths intersect and I can maybe peek and still see them succeeding, or they can tell me or something. But I think that's just my personality. I think some people approach their physical therapy or personal training or coaching careers differently. Maybe it's, of course, I believe in objective measures. I believe in all of those things as for proof and so forth, but might not come at it with just the same level of passion. And like this coaching, helping, like that's just who I am.
Yeah.
It's just inextricable from me.
There's got to be some, and I don't quite know how to put this delicately, but there's also got to be a little bit of a notion from the clients that you have that Meg has not had it easy. She's overcome a lot, and like I know when I've had people trying to help me, that I almost feel like I'm trying to. There's some pressure there, right? Like I got to live up to what they expect of me. And if somebody like Meg who's been through what you've been through has been able to do it, I better be able to do it too. I think is any of that at play, you think?
Well, there's been plenty of patients I've worked with over the years that had no idea about my injuries. If I wear pants, you might think that maybe I twisted my ankle. Like I know I don't walk perfectly.
Sure.
But first of all, it's definitely not my position to impose my story on anyone.
Right,
like
of course.
Their journey is their journey. And if telling my story will be helpful, maybe I'll tell it. But I often tell people, like, I like to keep some mystery in a relationship. Like I don't tell everybody. But I think it can add a level of empathy and understanding, because patients feel like they can trust me. I've had so many people, whether they're my patient or just somebody off the street, come and share with me challenges they've had because they see the physical scars that I have, know that there's probably some ability for me to relate to either their visible or invisible scars. I never want to pressure anybody or guilt anyone into doing anything. Just because I'm doing something doesn't mean you need to do it or that you should do it. Just know that if you want to do something that you see me doing, you probably can do it. So I think if that subtlety is understood.
I understand it 100%. And I think you put it very well. I mean, I had a podcast a year or two ago. We were talking about mental health, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he was, he's a military vet, had
Mm-hmm.
suffered some really challenging, and still suffers some challenges with mental health and PTSD.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
I was sort of drawing this comparison between stress in my life and stress in his life. And he just stopped me point blank and said, hey, it's not about that. It's my stress is no more significant than yours. And don't get into this game of talking about who's entitled to feeling like they should be feeling more or less stress and anxiety. Like, we all feel what we feel, and that's what you got to deal with, because that's what you have in front of you. Mm-hmm. And I love how you put that in terms of like, hey, if there's something you want to do and you have some doubts about being able to do it, like, I think you can, and I'm going to help you figure out how to do that.
100%. Totally. And additionally, like, I think people sometimes think that it's being in a PT office is almost like being in an optometrist. Like, is the letter clearer or is it fuzzier? Is this better or worse? And I always ask those questions, and I preface it with first saying, can you tell? Do you know? Mm-hmm. I don't know is a fair answer. It's like, have I helped you? Oh, I don't know. Great. That tells me that you don't know, and either I need to change my approach, my words, my therapies, so that you feel different, you feel empowered, you feel more capable.
Right.
And if you don't know right now, that's okay. That's valuable. So I think that pressure can be lessened with the words that we use.
Yeah. Well, talk about your decision to move into coaching in addition to into physical therapy. I mean, you mentioned that the two are sort of intertwined in your philosophical approach. Was it going to be coaching as well as PT from the start? Do you view those as distinct services? Like, how do you kind of conceptualize that?
Yeah, they are distinct services. While there is gray area and overlap, I definitely provide strength and conditioning, cycling, and I like to call it resilience training. That's something that I'm super passionate about, helping people stay mobile and avoid going to see the physical therapist. Mm-hmm. But if somebody has something specific that I can add a diagnosis to, I'm eager to help anyone and I can. So whether that's using cash pay or insurance, we call it cash pay, we call it direct pay model, or the insurance-based model, like I want to be accessible to people so that I can meet them where they need me and I can help them move forward. I see a lot of overlap in them, but they are distinct services.
What's your philosophical approach to, the coaching piece as a complement or as a critical part of your approach to physical therapy?
So I have a hard time really philosophically dissecting coaching from physical therapy, but in a business standpoint, I can do that. I really enjoy helping people reach their goals, mm-hmm. whether that be range of motion of their shoulder, for example, or biking across the country. I think there's elements in both of those that a coach or a physical therapist can help with, but I do offer separate and distinct services. And some of those services I offered, like the coaching, I can coach somebody across the country. I've got athletes across the country that I help with. Of course, with physical therapy, that's only here in Missoula.
Sure. A little bit more difficult to create a remote model for PT. Let's talk a little bit about your relationship to this community. Missoula's been a big part of your life, mm-hmm. your undergraduate experience, and you've chosen mm-hmm. to sort of ground your professional existence here. Mm-hmm. What's unique about this place? What about it grabs you?
That is a great question. I think that I call Missoula a big kid playground. I get excited for every season. There's something I love about it. I like that I can very quickly be out of town, even if it's just Cherry Gulch, which is hardly out of town.
It
But there are
feels that way
times,
when you're there, though.
100%, like you can find times of the day where you are the only one there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's magical. The wildflowers in the springtime, the snow when it sparkles like diamonds in the winter. I think there's times that I get excited about just being there. But of course, we're surrounded by mountains and surrounded by wilderness. Our towns don't yet touch here in Montana, really. So there's the space to find yourself. Certainly professionally, being with people, and personally, I love people. I love my friends. I love my family. That said, I do need quiet time where I can just focus on my breath.
Sure. Yeah, and definitely the landscape enables that. But also, I mean, you mentioned the people. The people in this place are also a key part of what makes this place special.
Yes.
Talk about that a little bit. What do you find interesting about the community?
Oh, that's a great. Yeah. You ask great questions. So I am an import to Missoula, and I think there's something to be said about people who are native here. But when I meet a native Montana or Missoulian, I want to say, please leave for a little bit. I hope you take some time to leave in order to know how great this place is.
Mm-hmm.
Because like I've traveled around the world. I've lived in Chicago and along the West Coast and so forth. Like when I lived in Seattle, for instance, when you walk down the sidewalk, people don't look you in the eye. When you're in the bus, people don't look to see you. When you go to the park, again, Seattleites are great people. I loved my time there. It's not home. Doesn't have the same kind of enveloping. When you come to Missoula, I think when you walk down the street, people inevitably look you in the face, and most of the time they'll smile. And gosh, that just feels great, doesn't it? I mean, boy, howdy, that's wonderful. I think people here recognize how special this place is and try to aim for a sense of community because it's still small enough that we can make a difference. Seattle, it's pretty darn big. Chicago, it's huge. And I lived in a suburb. I lived 18 miles outside the city. That said, my horizons were never dark. It always had the glow of Chicago. Sunsets were amazing because of the smog and air pollution, but that's different. Like that's just different. The sense of community and how people can join together and still make a difference for each other is something that is uniquely Missoula.
So community's been a big part of your existence. You've talked about some of the individual people that have propelled you and enabled you to get to where you are today. Mm-hmm. I know that you also have gratitude for some organizations that have believed in you and some sponsors that have supported your endeavors, both at the peak of your competition and now as sort of a local ambassador for sport.
Yes. Thanks very much for opening that space, because I have so much gratitude for the Missoula community who's embraced me and enabled me to continue working in the profession that it's a dream come true to be a physical therapist in this town. I love working with my coaching athletes, and then I still get to race. It's my job is no longer to be at the pointy end of the race, like winning the race. My job is to be in the pack, be in the meat of it, and being basically like a mobile cheering squad and being a bit of a demonstration of what we can overcome.
Right.
And I am so grateful for companies like Gore Wear. Their clothing has just enabled me to be out in the elements, whether it's 15 below on a fat bike or 100 degrees in the summer. And SRAM has always been a sponsor, even when I raced on the national team, because I actually ride with two different crank sets. My drive side, the right crank arm is 170 millimeters, and my left side is 165.
Yeah, that's an expensive setup.
Yeah, so most bike companies would require me to buy two crank sets.
Right.
Shimano has always sent me a left crank arm for free. for the past, like, I couldn't even tell you, a decade. They've never questioned it. They said, oh yeah, definitely. We'll send you one of those. Even before I was a sponsored SRAM athlete, like,
Okay.
I mean, they're a stand-up company. I've loved riding on salsa cycles. They've got a bike for every activity, whether, commuting, riding 200 miles of gravel, 50 miles of mountain biking, or boosting off, dead man's.
Sure.
And I've just been really lucky to join up with some companies that enable me to continue pushing my limits and continuing to show the capacity of the human mind and spirit.
Well, Meg, this has been an inspiration, just learning about your path and your approach to life and your approach to helping others live the lives they want to live. Kind of final question is, if there's so much to learn here, but if you want listeners to take away one thing, what do you think that one thing would be?
That one thing, I want people to know deep down in their souls that they are capable of more than they know. These hard times pass, and we will survive them. I believe that we're all more capable than we know.
Well said. And I think those are words that we all need to kind of think deeply about and live by in many ways. Meg, such a pleasure. Thank you for your approach to life, what you're doing in our community, and the sort of the role model you've set for so many people in this place and beyond.
Thank you for allowing me to share time with you.
Thanks for listening to A New Angle. We really appreciate it. A New Angle is underwritten by First Security Bank and Blackfoot, with support from the University of Montana College of Business and Consolidated Electrical Distributors. AJ Williams is our producer. Jeff Ament, John Wicks, and VTO made our music, and Jeff Meese is our master of all things sound. If you have any questions, suggestions, comments, insults, whatever, please email me at anewangle@umontana.edu. If you like what you heard, tell your friends about us. Thanks a lot, and see you next time.